The lawnmower roared to life at precisely 7:02 a.m., shattering the suburban silence like a declaration of war. Margaret Holloway, known to her HOA colleagues as the neighborhood's most formidable rule enforcer, gripped her binoculars, her manicured fingers trembling with rage. Violation. Absolute violation. The sound was coming from the Jameson property, a sprawling corner lot that had been the bane of her existence for months. Residential Code 7.3, subsection C clearly stated that residential lawn maintenance could not commence before 7:30 a.m. on weekends. This was a flagrant, unacceptable breach. Margaret, or Karen, as she'd been not so affectionately nicknamed by the younger homeowners, had spent decades cultivating the pristine aesthetic of Willowbrook Estates. Every blade of grass, every mailbox, every precisely trimmed hedge was a testament to her vigilance. And now this audacious disruption of her meticulously maintained order. She grabbed her phone, fingers flying across the screen as she composed an email to the HOA board. Photographic evidence would be attached. Timestamps would be noted. Consequences would be swift. Robert Jameson thinks he can just do whatever he wants, she muttered, her voice a low, dangerous growl. The lawnmower's drone continued, each rotational pass of the blades feeling like a personal insult. What Robert didn't understand, what none of these new homeowners seemed to comprehend, was the sacred responsibility of maintaining property values. Karen had single-handedly prevented no fewer than 17 potential aesthetic disasters in the past 3 years. Unapproved paint colors, unauthorized garden gnomes, trash cans left out an extra day. Each potential violation had been systematically documented, reported, and rectified. She zoomed her binoculars, capturing multiple shots of the offending lawn maintenance. The grass was being cut unevenly. Of course it was. Robert had probably purchased some discount mower from a big box store, completely disregarding the HOA recommended landscaping equipment guidelines. Her phone buzzed. A text from Linda Peterson, her closest ally on the neighborhood watch. Did you see? Karen responded immediately. Documentation in progress. Board meeting will address this. The lawnmower suddenly sputtered and stopped. Silence descended, but Karen knew this was far from over. She had weapons far more potent than noise complaints. She had bylaws, regulations, and an ironclad determination to maintain absolute order. Little did Robert Jameson know his morning of lawn maintenance was about to become a masterclass in HOA enforcement. Margaret Holloway was not just going to file a complaint, she was going to make an example of him. And in Willowbrook Estates, examples were something Margaret had perfected into an art form. The HOA board meeting was a battlefield, and Margaret Holloway was generaling her offensive with surgical precision. 12 folding chairs arranged in a semicircle, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on meticulously pressed khakis and pastel sweater sets. Robert Jameson sat 3 chairs away, looking infuriatingly calm. Item 7. Margaret announced, her voice cutting through the municipal-grade air conditioning, unauthorized lawn maintenance violation, Jameson property. She clicked her presentation remote. Photographs appeared on the screen, damning evidence of early morning lawn mowing. Timestamps, angle shots, close-ups of uneven grass cutting. Each image was a weapon, carefully curated to demonstrate maximum infractions. Not only did Mr. Jameson violate Section 7.3 of our residential maintenance guidelines, she continued, but he also used equipment that does not meet our approved landscaping standards. Her pointer, a gleaming silver telescopic device, tapped each transgression with military precision. Robert shifted in his seat. A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth, which only inflamed Margaret's determination further. Board member Helen Weatherby leaned forward. How early was the mowing, Margaret? 7:02 a.m., Margaret responded instantly. 32 minutes before permitted weekend maintenance hours. The room rippled with murmurs. Clipboards rustled. Pens clicked. What Margaret didn't know, what she couldn't possibly anticipate, was that Robert Jameson was not an ordinary homeowner. He had spent the last 6 months quietly gathering his own documentation, his own evidence. And today, he was prepared. "I'd like to offer a response," Robert said, his voice calm and measured. Margaret's eyes narrowed. She had not expected a challenge. Challenges were not typically permitted in her carefully orchestrated universe of rules and regulations. "The floor recognizes Mr. Jameson," mumbled George Franklin, the board's elderly secretary, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Robert stood. He was tall, mid-40s, with the deliberate movements of someone who understood exactly how to navigate bureaucratic landscapes. In his hand, he held a thick manila folder. "Before we discuss the alleged lawn maintenance violation," he began, "I'd like to present some documentation regarding recent HOA financial discrepancies." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Margaret's perfectly applied makeup suddenly felt too tight, her crisp white blouse restrictive. Something was happening. Something she had not predicted, had not planned for. And in bureaucratic warfare, being caught unprepared was the most dangerous position of all. 3 days after the board meeting, Margaret's world began to unravel with surgical precision. Robert Jameson's manila folder was more than a mere collection of papers. It was a meticulously constructed weapon of bureaucratic destruction. Financial records, expense reports, detailed spreadsheets showing irregularities in the HUA's accounting that dated back nearly 5 years. Each page was annotated, cross-referenced, with copies of bank statements, invoices, and transaction logs that painted a damning picture. Margaret's weekly bridge club became a minefield of sideways glances and hushed conversations. Linda Peterson, her longtime confidant, now avoided eye contact during their Thursday afternoon meetings at the country club. The whispers were spreading like wildfire through Willowbrook Estates. How much? Helen Weatherby had asked during an emergency board meeting, her reading glasses sliding down her nose as she reviewed the documents. The numbers were substantial. Not enough to suggest outright theft, but definitely enough to raise serious questions about financial management. Small discrepancies, consistent patterns of questionable expenditures. Margaret had always considered herself the guardian of the neighborhood, but now she was being scrutinized with the same intensity she'd used to monitor everyone else. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Emails from board members, texts from neighbors. Each notification felt like another nail in a coffin she was desperately trying to keep closed. Robert Jameson hadn't just challenged her about a law-mowing violation, yet launched a full-scale strategic assault on everything Margaret believed she controlled. She traced the origins of this attack in her mind. The new homeowners who had moved in over the past 2 years, the younger couples, the tech professionals, they didn't understand the delicate ecosystem of a perfect neighborhood. They didn't respect the unwritten rules, the careful balance she had maintained for decades. But Robert was different. He wasn't just another newcomer. He was calculating, precise. He had been gathering information, building his case, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Margaret's home office became her war room. Stacks of papers, highlighted documents, printed emails spread across her antique mahogany desk. She was searching for a counter-strategy, a way to turn this situation around. Her landline rang, an old-school communication method she insisted on maintaining, much to the annoyance of younger residents. Mrs. Holloway, a crisp voice announced, "It is Gregory Thompson from the county auditor's office." The world seemed to stop, suspended in that moment between accusation and investigation. Margaret gripped her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she developed years ago when confronting difficult situations. But this was different. This was an attack she hadn't anticipated. This was war. The county auditor's investigation moved with glacial precision, each day stretching into an eternity of mounting pressure. Margaret Holloway discovered that reputation, once fractured, shatters faster than fine china dropped on granite. Her carefully curated social circle began to disintegrate. The weekly bridge club, her longtime sanctuary of suburban solidarity, became a minefield of awkward silences and strategic seating arrangements. Helen Weatherby now sat at the far end of the table, her once friendly smile replaced by a calculating stare. "I've known Margaret for 20 years, Helen had been overheard saying at the local salon, but these documents, they raised serious questions. Questions. Always questions. Margaret knew how to ask questions. She'd spent decades interrogating neighbors about unauthorized garden decorations, unapproved paint colors, and lawn maintenance violations. Now the questions were being turned against her, a relentless tide of scrutiny that threatened to wash away everything she built. Robert Jameson seemed to materialize everywhere, at the local coffee shop, walking his perfectly groomed golden retriever, collecting his mail. Each appearance felt calculated, a silent reminder of the impending investigation. The county auditor's initial report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic understatement. Irregularities detected, potential misallocation of funds, discrepancies requiring further investigation. Margaret's legal defense fund, meticulously accumulated over years of HOA assessments and strategic financial management, was rapidly being depleted. Lawyers don't work for free, and Margaret was learning that maintaining control comes with a price tag. Her daughter, Rebecca, a corporate lawyer in Chicago who had long been embarrassed by her mother's neighborhood tyranny, finally returned her calls. "Mom," Rebecca said, her voice a mixture of concern and barely concealed frustration, "you need to stop talking to everyone. Anything you say can be used against you." But silence had never been Margaret's strength. She was a woman who believed in documentation and rules in making her voice heard. Staying quiet felt like surrender. The neighborhood watched. Whispers traveled faster than official communications. Neighbors who had once feared her now looked at Margaret with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The hunter had become the hunted. Robert Jameson's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. He hadn't just challenged Margaret. He had systematically dismantled her entire power structure, piece by careful piece. One wrong move now could be her final undoing. The county auditor's next visit was scheduled. The HOA board was preparing for an emergency meeting. and Margaret Holloway was running out of ways to control the narrative that was rapidly spinning beyond her grasp. The emergency OHO board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., but Margaret arrived at 6:15, her carefully pressed pantsuit armor of defiance. The community center's fluorescent lights seemed harsher than usual, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor that felt like accusatory fingers. Robert Jameson was already there, seated casually near the front, his manila folder resting on the table like a silent weapon. Margaret counted the attendees. More neighbors had shown up than in any meeting in Willowbrook Estates history. This wasn't just a board meeting. This was a public trial. George Franklin, the elderly secretary, looked particularly uncomfortable. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged papers, avoiding direct eye contact with Margaret. She knew that look. It was the same expression neighbors would get when she caught them violating some obscure bylaws. The irony was not lost on her. Linda Peterson, her once loyal Bridge Club compatriot, sat 3 rows back, deliberately not meeting Margaret's gaze. Years of shared gossip of strategic neighborhood management now reduced to this moment of public reckoning. "The meeting will now come to order," George announced, his voice quavering. Robert stood first. No dramatics, no unnecessary flourish, just a calm, methodical presentation of financial discrepancies that painted Margaret as something she'd never been: vulnerable. Bank transfers, unexplained expenses, questionable vendor contracts. Each slide was a surgical strike, dismantling Margaret's reputation with cold, hard evidence. "These aren't just small irregularities," Robert explained, his voice professional and measured. "These are systematic misappropriations of HOA funds over multiple years." Margaret's mind raced. She always believed her actions were for the greater good. Every rule enforced, every complaint filed, every fine issued, all in service of maintaining property values, of keeping Willowbrook Estates pristine. But pristine came with a price, and now that price was being calculated in black and white, projected on a screen for everyone to see. Helen Weatherby leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "Mrs. Holloway, do you have a response to these allegations?" The room fell silent. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward Margaret. Neighbors who had feared her. Neighbors she had protected. Neighbors she had controlled. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the edge of her chair. Years of meticulous control were unraveling in real time. And Robert Jameson, the man with the perfectly maintained lawn, the man who had triggered this entire investigation with a simple early morning mowing, watched with the calm of a chess master who had planned every single move. The aftermath of the board meeting was a slow-motion demolition of everything Margaret Holloway had constructed. Her phone stopped ringing. Her email inbox, once a weapon of neighborhood control, became a graveyard of unanswered messages and formal notices. Rebecca, her corporate lawyer daughter, arrived unannounced 3 days later. She moved through Margaret's meticulously decorated living room like a forensic investigator, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "Mom," Rebecca said, her voice a blend of professional concern and familial frustration, "you need to understand the severity of this situation." Margaret's defense was automatic, a reflex honed by decades of bureaucratic warfare. "I was protecting the neighborhood. Those people, the new homeowners, they don't understand the importance of maintaining standards." Rebecca placed a thick file on the coffee table, legal documents, financial statements, potential charges. "This isn't about maintaining standards anymore," she replied. "This is about potential criminal charges." The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Criminal. The term felt foreign to Margaret. She had always been the enforcer, the one who called authorities, who filed complaints, who made sure rules were followed. Now the rules were turning against her. Robert Jameson's strategy became clear in retrospect. The early morning lawn mowing wasn't just a provocation. It was the first move in a carefully orchestrated takedown. He had been gathering evidence for months, perhaps years, waiting, calculating. Margaret's landline rang. She hesitated before answering, a first in her life of immediate, decisive action. "Mrs. Holloway," a professional voice announced, "It's his Detective Martinez from the County Financial Crimes Unit." The world seemed to compress into that single moment, decades of neighborhood control. Years of meticulous rule enforcement, endless board meetings and violation notices, all reducible to this single phone call. Rebecca watched her mother, professional detachment mixed with a hint of familial pain. Margaret Holloway, the woman who had controlled an entire neighborhood through bylaws and bureaucratic intimidation, was about to become the very thing she had always feared and condemned: a rule breaker. Outside, the neighborhood continued its quiet existence. Perfectly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, meticulously maintained landscaping. The very order Margaret had fought to preserve was now a backdrop to her potential downfall. Robert Jameson's golden retriever walked past the window, a silent sentinel to the transformation about to unfold. The dog seemed to pause, looking directly into the living room, a final, knowing acknowledgement of the strategic victory that had been months in the making. The county courthouse was a study in bureaucratic sterility. Fluorescent lights, worn linoleum floors, wooden benches that had witnessed countless stories of municipal drama. Margaret Holloway sat with her daughter Rebecca, the space between them filled with unspoken years of conflict and control. Her legal defense was a last-ditch effort, cobbled together from years of AOA's surplus funds and Rebecca's strategic maneuvering. The financial crimes investigation had transformed Margaret from neighborhood enforcer to defendant, a role she had never imagined possible. Robert Jameson sat 3 rows back, his presence a calculated reminder of the strategic dismantling he had orchestrated. The golden retriever, now famous in neighborhood lore, was presumably at home an unwitting participant in this bureaucratic chess match. The state will demonstrate, the prosecutor began, a pattern of financial misconduct spanning multiple years. Spreadsheets appeared on the courtroom's projection screen. Bank transfers, vendor contracts, suspicious expenditures that told a story of systematic misappropriation. Margaret's decades of neighborhood control were being reduced to cold, hard numbers. Her mind wandered to every violation she had ever reported, every homeowner she had confronted, every minor infraction she had documented with zealous precision. The irony was not lost on her. She who had been the most ardent rule enforcer was now the one facing potential prosecution. Rebecca leaned in, her voice a sharp whisper. "Say nothing. Let me handle this." But Margaret Holloway had never been good at staying silent. "I was protecting the neighborhood," she muttered, loud enough for the court reporter to capture. "Someone has to maintain standards." The judge, a stern woman in her late 50s, looked up, her eyes conveying a mixture of exhaustion and mild contempt. Margaret recognized that look. It was the same expression she used when confronting neighbors about unauthorized garden decorations. Robert Jameson's documentation was meticulous. Bank statements, handle-beating minutes, emails. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of Margaret's reputation. What had begun as an early morning lawn mowing violation had transformed into a full-scale investigation that threatened to unravel everything she had built. The neighborhood of Willowbrook Estates watched. Neighbors who had feared her. Neighbors she had protected. Neighbors she had controlled. Now they were witnesses to her potential downfall. "Mrs. Holloway," the prosecutor continued, "your actions demonstrate a consistent pattern of financial irregularities that cannot be explained as mere administrative oversight." Margaret's world, her carefully constructed universe of rules, violations, and neighborhood control, was collapsing around her. The very system she had used to maintain order was now being used to dismantle her entire existence. And Robert Jameson sat silently, the architect of her destruction, waiting for the final act to unfold.